So less fake caring about things a world away and more real investment in the people we know and love.
Hello, this is Joe Lindsley in Lviv, Ukraine. Every week, James David Dickson, reporter at the Detroit News, and I are discussing ways that we can create media that gives people value rather than steals their attention, and to find better personal habits of information and media consumption. For more information, you can visit our website, LvivLab.com. That's for the Lviv Lab, for the activation of democracy, LvivLab.com. And you can also listen to our introductory podcast with more of an introduction about who we are and why we're telling these stories. But with that, here's our conversation with me speaking from Lviv, Ukraine, and James Dickson speaking from Detroit, Michigan.
Well, one thing you have to understand about the news business is that a bad day for you or a bad day for your community, a bad day for humanity is a great day for the news business. So fundamentally, when you're reading this stuff, it's the things that are happening, chances are they're at odds with your wellness. They're at odds with your financial well-being. They could be at odds with your physical freedom. It's going to cost you more money. Say, I think about the COVID pandemic. Pretty much every news outlet in America did record numbers. Now, was it because they were writing more compelling news or, digging deeper for scoops than before? Of course not. It's because you were afraid. And so many of us, so many of our neighbors sat in front of the TV or sat and they subscribed to the push alerts and they clicked all of them. And they waited for the day when the TV or the people in the news or the people at government podiums would tell them it was safe to stop. And I don't think they ever realized that how at odds that was with those people's agendas. If you're watching me with rapt attention, why would I want you to stop? So you have to understand the motivations that go into it. And then we think about phrases like, if it bleeds, it leads. I'll defend that every day. I mean, I did breaking news for 5 years. If things are bleeding, that actually is important. Okay. So that's not a bad thing. But again, it goes back to that dynamic from earlier. What's bad for you and bad for your community is good for the business. And you have to understand that.
Well, and I was speaking with a friend who's a small business guy here in Lviv, Ukraine, and has a shop which he opened in the pandemic. And saying, every day we see the news, especially now we have, everything seems to hit here much, much later than everywhere else. But only now did we just begin our wonderful foray into the Delta land, the Delta variant. And so every day there's stories about, hospitals, being overcrowded and overwhelmed. And my friend said, it would be nice if the media would show us statistics for everything else at the same time so that we could have some perspective. How many, what are the car accident statistics? What are, cancer, heart attack, and then compare it to previous years. But there's not an incentive to sort of do that type of work, right? Because you have everyone wrapped, and the numbers are good on these stories. And so, it might not. And I even look at nonprofit media, which tries to be independent and maybe tries to do journalism that's removed from sort of the Fox News, CNN, grab them by the eyeballs method. But even nonprofit media, they have to measure, like when they report to their donors, they measure their success by the amount of people's time they waste. How long did someone stare at an article? And how long are people sort of stuck on our website? And information is almost designed to keep people sort of mired and stuck rather than to be able to process it quickly and move on. And this is
and Joe, what you're seeing and is something that I've been noticing as well, where the differences between, so there are clearly differences, right, between the New York Times and Twitter and Netflix. But the what's similar about all three is that all three their models are based on you being addicted to what they do, addicted to their work, addicted to their product. So I'm gonna keep clicking these push alerts. I'm gonna refresh the page for the latest and greatest numbers. This is a level of engagement with ideas that humans have never had. This is a scale and I think for good reason. I think, you think about someone like a monk or people who live in these isolated settings. The whole point of that is focus. Whereas the whole point of our environment now is keep clicking, continue watching, and you're not ever supposed to pull yourself away and live a healthy life. So the headlines, what gets put as a trending topic, and what's on that front page of Netflix are all designed to make you park there all day.
Yeah, and when you said if it bleeds, it leads, it makes me think of the glory days of newspapers in the 20th century, and obviously, especially in big cities, London or Detroit, where that you had to compete for attention on the streets with your headlines. But I think it's of a different kind now, because you could read that paper and put it away. It's not, now we can imagine that physical newspaper, if we had a visual for it, you try to put it away and it just keeps wrapping itself around your face. That's what's happening with the internet. And so in a sense, it's the development of the same principle. You've always had to get people's attention. But it's a difference between getting people's attention and controlling and commanding it.
But, the other difference with that is I think about a century ago, say if this was Detroit when the streetcars were going, you might get on there and the writer before you had left their newspaper and you open it up and, but there was something in that novel worth of a newspaper to grab your interest. Mm. But the big difference is that was an opt-in experience. Here, a century later, you have to put so much more of your energy into opting out, not doing the push alerts, not letting this stuff invade your attention and invade your life. You almost have to subscribe and engage and consume these materials like they would have done in the 60s, right? The radio's either on or it's off. Mm-hmm. The TV's either on or it's off. But when you talk about computers and phones, those are never off. So we have to be disciplined enough to pull ourselves away.
This maybe you and I have talked about this before, but there was a moment when I was living in New Orleans and Mardi Gras, maybe it was 2017 or 2018. And at one of the biggest parades the Saturday before Mardi Gras, and with family and friends, and everyone's having a great time in the New Orleans fashion, and these massive floats are going by, and each one has a band on it, and it was a great atmosphere. And then all of a sudden, it was Saturday night, and all of our phones started to blow up. People are from around the country are texting everyone they know in New Orleans saying, "Are you okay? Are you alive? What's going on?" And so all of a sudden, our moment of joy, something has started to break it. I go to Drudge Report, and I see this massive headline, "Mayhem in New Orleans." And oh shit, I thought, something horrible is happening. And so I click on the story and I read. And finally, as I get to the end of the story, I realized that the incident had happened 1 block from me, just down the parade route, less than a block. And a drunk guy had driven into a crowd.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And it turns out no one was hurt. And the guy just fell asleep at the wheel, and it took care of the problem. And had someone, sitting on their couch in Kansas or California been out, living their lives on a Saturday night instead of glued to their screens, they never would have known about this. And I, who was 1 block away, never would have known. It never would have impeded my enjoyment. No one was hurt. Everything was fine. But so there was, to me, a very stark example of how there's news that I don't need to know. And yet, everyone in the country is watching it. I'm right there and I don't need to know it, but it did invade my life. And how, and it was a great headline, "Oh, mayhem in New Orleans" sounds,
that is Exhibit A and how unhealthy this stuff can be. So you had proximity to it, but the event itself didn't bring itself to your attention. The thing a block from you that had happened.
Mhm.
It was real, it happened, but it didn't matter to you, right? A block from where you were, had you not gotten text messages from people across the country, you probably would have never heard about it, or you hear about it in the morning. Oh, you hear about what happened with that guy who fell asleep when he was driving. And what are these people doing that they have this space in their heart for this, for a car crash in New Orleans? It's a car crash in New Orleans.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll go to CNN and the big headline will be stabbing in Israel, or maybe a car crash in New York City, or a bad storm on the East Coast. Why do you care? Why do you care? And a lot of people will fall back on humanism, right? And yes, we do have an interest in other people's stories. That is true. But why do you care? I can see reading it if you can admit to yourself that you're bored and you have nothing better to do. But to take on some kind of high ground with it and say that me caring more about this car crash in New Orleans than a guy a block away from it, that actually doesn't make you a better person. It makes you a sad person.
Yeah, because
we are nowhere near that understanding. We're nowhere near to the point where we can have that conversation with civilians, right? But someday.
Yeah, and with many of our colleagues, and it's when you ask that question, why do you care? Some might say that sounds so callous, but then you think of sort of the opportunity cost of because our attention is limited, and so let's say you're caring about something far off that you read on Judge Report, or because every night you invite Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow into your living room. But what about your neighbors? What are all the stories you don't know about? The suffering and the challenges and the hopes and the fears of people right around you. Why do you not care about those things? Because every time you choose to give your attention to something, you are preventing your attention from going towards something else. And I think that's what we miss, because people might say, oh yeah, I want to care about all these things far away. But what are we not caring about as a result, I think, is a question we should ask.
And another one of the big lies we tell ourselves to perpetuate this, we say, well, you can do both. But you don't do both. You don't do both. There's a deficiency. There's a clear gap, right? You're far too interested, and this we talked about last, too interested in things that happened a world away, and not interested enough in your own community, even your own household, even your own spouse, even your own children. So if we spent more time digging deep there, if we didn't accept it when a kid comes home from school and you ask them how the day was and they say fine and it ends there. If we took a genuine interest in our family members, in our neighbors, in their struggles, we won't have room for all this stuff a world away.
Yeah.
And I think so much pain and so much anxiety in our world comes when we try to make our field of vision too big. You're worried about the world when you need to go about your day. There's your life better, to make your house better, to make your community stronger. So less fake caring about things a world away and more real investment in the people we know and love.